Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. This is the Heroic and Normal DPS guide for Korog, the 6th boss in Highmaul. There are a lot of abilities going on here, but this fight really focuses on the idea of magic absorption and shielding and soaking up various magical abilities, particularly if you're a ranged DPS, by using the boss's own nullification barrier against him. Now, while you're attacking Korog, you may notice that you aren't doing very much damage to him because of his nullification barrier shield that's active. This basically soaks up magical damage, and once the shield is gone, he will move to the center of the room and start to recharge it over 20 seconds, which you see him doing right there. During this period, he will spawn a bunch of adds, which you can ignore for the time being, and basically continue DPSing him. However, there's one critical factor here. When he starts to recharge, the first player to step inside that magical area in the center with him will also receive a nullification barrier of their own. They will also start to take damage from caustic energy, as well as have reduced healing on them. However, it's only the very first player to step into that shield for any given recharge phase, and gaining the shield is critical to handling one of the main damage sources in the fight. So, your raid strategy will obviously dictate who should step into the center for any given recharge phase, but generally speaking, it's going to be ranged DPS that are in charge of this, primarily because they can move around the room to soak up the orbs that are necessary with the barrier while still continuing to DPS, whereas melee cannot do so. That said, melee are going to critically be the ones that need to be careful not to be in the center when the recharge begins. So watch his barrier bar closely, and when it's about to evaporate and he's going to go in the middle, stay clear of that center position so that you don't accidentally step into the middle first and gain the barrier accidentally instead of one of the ranged. So, like I said, this is a critical factor in the success of the fight. So the best thing you can do if you're melee is watch the bar closely, stay clear of the center when it's about to evaporate, and if you're ranged, also stay clear of the center, but know whether you're supposed to step in for any given phase or not. Also, a quick note is if you are assigned to soak up the shield in the center there, you stay in there the whole 20 seconds as long as you receive enough healing, but don't worry about using personal cooldowns because the damage from the caustic energy that's hitting you while you're in that shield recharge area cannot be mitigated. So damage reduction doesn't do anything. So just stay in the middle while you're soaking it up and attack the boss just like you normally would. Now, if you were assigned to be in the middle and get your own nullification barrier, then once it's complete, you will have a pretty massive magical absorption shield on you, in the millions easily. And with this active, you can then help to soak up the overflowing energy orbs that are falling from the ceiling. There you can see a bunch of them hitting right now. These are marked on the ground by little tiny green circles, random spots around the room, and you'll also be able to see them in the sky directly above those circles as they're falling down. Basically, the idea here is if no player is underneath an orb when it lands, it will do raid-wide damage, pretty significant. But if a player is in the circle, it will do a huge amount of damage, like over 1 million, to that individual player. However, that player will then prevent the raid damage. And if that player has the nullification barrier from soaking up in the middle, then nothing will happen. It'll just be absorbed by the shield that's on you. So that's the basic idea, is the raid rotates one new ranged DPS into the barrier every time it's being recharged, gets their own barrier stacked up, and then they can soak up the orbs. And for the most part, if you do it properly, you can soak up all but about 1 orb in every set that comes out. Now, throughout the fight, very frequently, the boss will target a random ranged raid member and use trample. He will basically leap toward that player's location and slam his mace down after a period. He will then leave behind a suppression field, which is a purple circle. You can see a bunch of them on the ground there. And any player that steps into the field will take pretty heavy damage over time, as well as be silenced. So, the best thing you can do is to watch if he's targeting you, and quickly sidestep out of the location. If you're fast enough to react, you can avoid it altogether. But if you do get hit, then you still obviously want to move out as quickly as possible, just to avoid the damage and the silence. Now, these fields are actually used in the barrier phase, or just shortly after. During the barrier phase, you'll notice a bunch of anomaly adds will spawn, and these will be picked up by one of your tanks, but during this period, you as a DPS should ignore them completely. The reason for this is if you kill an anomaly and it is not silenced, it will explode and do raid-wide damage, and this can be pretty significant with so many spawns. So the best thing is to have your tank pick them all up, and once the phase is over and they're all spawned, the tank will move them into a suppression field. The adds will be silenced as well, and then you can DPS them down quickly, and they will not explode because they'll be silenced. So, assuming that the raid strategy is somewhat similar to that, the best thing you can do is continue attacking the boss during the recharge phase, and just DPS him heavily, and then once the phase is over, then you can be switching to the adds and killing them while they're silenced. Lastly, we have the 4 Expel magics that the boss will use, and we'll talk about them in order of frequency, not necessarily which is the most critical for DPS to worry about. Arcane is the most frequent. It's used on the tank, and it basically causes the tank to leave little explosions behind themselves as they run around. As DPS, you shouldn't really be affected by this. If your tanks are positioned properly, they will not be in danger of running past any DPS, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. The Frost Orb is the second most frequent Expel magic, and this is probably the most dangerous for DPS that don't handle it properly. This is basically just a giant Frost Orb, of course, that spawns at a random location, and it does significant damage, as well as snares any players that are inside it. The damage and the slow is stronger the closer to the center you are. So if one spawns near you and you're afflicted, use a movement boost or teleport or something to get out of it quickly, and then go about your business doing DPS after that. Expel Magic Fire is the third most common, and this will debuff everyone in the raid, and it will cause a dot over about 10 seconds. And more importantly, when the debuff expires, you will explode in a small radius around you for significant fire damage. So the best thing you can do is if you're a ranged DPS, when this is cast, spread out a bit so that no one is within about 5 to 10 yards of you. And then you can let it expire and you won't do any damage to anyone. If you are a melee DPS, your action when you get the fire debuff will depend on your raid strategy. If your raid plans to dispel melee, which is what our raid did, and it worked fine, with like a mass dispel from a priest, then you can just keep attacking and stay in position. You know, you obviously want to spread around the boss just to help mitigate things a little bit, but you can continue being in melee range. However, if your raid does not choose to dispel melee, then you'll need to run out and spread when it's about to expire as well. And make sure you don't wait too long, because if you wait till the last second, and maybe a bunch of melee happen to go in the same direction, you could kill each other. And just to be complete, the last Expel magic is Shadow, but nothing you really need to think about as DPS. It's just a healing absorption shield, so it's mostly going to be up to your healers to mitigate it. You could obviously help out with using a personal cooldown, but it's probably not necessary. So I think that about does it for DPS on Korhog. Really, there isn't a lot going on for DPS to worry about. The best thing you can do is watch your positioning if you're ranged for the charge, or excuse me, the leap attack that he uses to drop suppression fields, as well as the explosion from the Expel Magic Fire when that comes out. And make sure you are stepping into the center if you're assigned to soak up that particular phase's nullification barrier. And if so, then you need to step into the green orbs as they fall down. But if you're not assigned to do any of that, most of the time you can just stay kind of around the outside ring and DPS your heart out. So, that is the Heroic and Normal DPS guide for Korhog. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.